Welcome back to another episode from Barking Bond's lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from today? We'd love to know. Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's dive into today's gripping story. Thus, forest had a way of swallowing sound, of holding secrets tight between its trees. That morning, it was keeping the biggest one of all. He had been left for dead in the woods. No radio, no backup, just blood on the leaves and the unblinking silence of red leaf forest pressing in on all sides. Deputy Cole Maddox had stumbled onto something dangerous, something meant to stay hidden, and someone had made certain he wouldn't walk out to tell the tale. But fate had other plans, because the forest was not empty. Two 10-year-old girls, identical twins with matching forest green jackets and a second-hand German shepherd at their heels, wandered along a trail most townsfolk avoided this late in the season. They were only supposed to be out for a quiet afternoon walk, their pockets half filled with acorns and smooth stones, their thoughts drifting like the leaves above them. But that walk was about to turn into something no child should have to face. They weren't heroes. Not yet. They were just sisters, one with a battered flip phone their mother insisted they carry, the other with a notebook crammed full of wild stories and dreams, and a dog, Rusty, who had been with them through every scraped knee, storm, and sleepless night. A dog who had never left their side and never would. What they were about to do would test everything they thought they knew about courage, and about how God sometimes answers prayers through the quiet bravery of ordinary people. The wind whispered through scarlet and amber leaves, spinning the first fallen ones across the mossy trail like forgotten letters scattered in haste. It was a crisp Saturday morning in late October, the kind of day that carried the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, and made the small town of Alder Glen, Vermont, feel like a page torn from an old storybook. Willa and June Fairweather moved through the forest as though it belonged to them. Willa, the steady one, walked in front, hazel eyes scanning every bend in the path, chestnut braids swaying against her navy scarf. June followed just behind, a step shorter, her gaze softer, more drawn to the golden light pooling between the trees than the trail ahead. If Willa was the protector, June was the dreamer, two halves of the same whole. Rusty padded at their heels, black and tan fur brushing against their legs, his amber eyes sharp and searching. Though he limped slightly from an old hip injury, he carried himself with the calm focus of a dog who knew his purpose. Once trained for search and rescue work before his injury ended that path, he had found a new one, guarding the twins with quiet devotion. They had taken the South Trail that day, the one most locals ignored after the first frost. Dead leaves softened their steps, the only sounds the crunch beneath their boots and the far-off snap of twigs as deer moved through the underbrush. Then Rusty froze. His ears pricked forward, nose lifted to the wind. Willa noticed before her sister. "Something's wrong," she murmured, her voice barely more than a breath. Rusty barked just once, but it was sharp, urgent. Then he veered, off the trail, weaving between the trunks, moving with purpose. Willa and June exchanged a quick glance, then followed without hesitation. 30 paces in, they saw him. At the base of a red maple, half hidden by fallen branches, lay a man in a sheriff's deputy uniform. His body was crumpled, one leg twisted unnaturally. Blood had pooled beneath him, soaking into the soil like ink bleeding into old paper. His face was pale, lips edged with blue, and a deep wound in his abdomen pulsed with each shallow breath. Willa gasped. June stopped cold. Rusty circled the man, sniffing quickly, his movements deliberate, not panicked. There was no mistaking the truth. This man was dying. Willa dropped to her knees beside him. "He's alive," she whispered. her fingers trembling as they hovered near the wound. "We need to stop the bleeding." June fumbled for the flip phone, its scratched screen flickering before the display came to life. "I'm calling 911, she said, voice tight. Deputy Cole Maddox had been with the department 3 years. At 32, he had the compact, wiry build of a runner and the quiet grit of a man who'd seen trouble up close. He had always preferred the quieter trails, patrolling for poachers, following faint tracks in the snow. What almost no one knew, except his boss and one old friend, was that he had been tracking a crew suspected of illegal logging and weapons smuggling. He wasn't supposed to be out there that morning, but instinct had pulled him in and nearly cost him his life. Willa yanked her scarf free and pressed it hard against the wound. "Hold this," she told June. Her sister knelt, pressing down with both hands, biting her lip hard to keep her fear from spilling out. "What did they say?" Willa asked. "They're coming," June whispered, eyes darting to the trees. "But 20 minutes. We're deep." 20 minutes. Too long. The blood kept coming. Willa grabbed a fallen stick and snapped it in two, using one piece to twist the scarf into a crude tourniquet. "Don't die," she muttered under her breath. "You're not allowed." Rusty lay down at Cole's feet, tail still, his gaze locked on the twins as though he understood the delicate fight happening in front of him. Back in town, in the small, second-story apartment above the shuttered Fairweather bakery, Maris Fairweather sat hunched over the kitchen table, a spiral notebook open before her. 36 years old, lean and sturdy from years of baking, she carried the exhaustion of someone who had kept moving long after she should have collapsed. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a messy bun, stray wisps curling at her temples. She was crossing out another overdue utility bill when the landline rang. Her heart jumped. "This is Officer Ramos with the Alder Glen Police Department. Are you the mother of Willa and June Fairweather?" Her voice caught. "Yes." "Is something wrong?" "They're safe," Ramos said quickly. "But there's been an incident. Your daughters found Deputy Maddox injured in the forest. They've given first aid. Paramedics are on their way." Maris sagged back into her chair, tears burning her eyes. Relief tangled with fear. Proud as she was, she also felt a pang of guilt. She had never taught them how to treat a wound, had barely been able to afford their worn winter boots. In the forest, faint sirens threaded through the trees. June's hands were numb. Willa's voice cracked as she repeated over and over, "Hold on! Hold on!" The EMTs arrived in a blur, lifting Cole onto a stretcher, voices low and urgent. A gray-haired medic with kind eyes knelt by the girls. "You just saved a man's life." "Really?" Willa whispered. "Really?" Rusty gave a single bark, pressing against June's legs. She leaned into him, tears spilling at last. Somewhere, beyond the sirens, the barking, the quiet sobs, the forest kept on. Leaves drifting down in the red leaf forest, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath in wonder. The frost clung to the corners of window panes like fragile lace as morning light crept into Alder Glen. Sunday had arrived with a sharper chill, though the forest still wore its autumn colors proudly, as if refusing to give in to winter. Inside the Fairweather apartment, Maris stood at the stove, watching the kettle rattle over the flame. Her shoulders ached from a restless night, her back stiff from worry. Maris Fairweather was a woman of quiet resilience, with strong hands calloused by years of kneading dough. She wore her exhaustion like a second coat, her dark hair tied in a knot that had begun to silver, not from age, but from the strain of survival. Once, she had dreamed of her own bakery, a dream briefly alive before the pandemic shuttered her shop and drained her savings. Now she scraped by with odd jobs, selling muffins at the market, tutoring math on weekends. Willa and June sat at the table, pink-cheeked from the warmth of the heating vent. Rusty lay curled under the bench, twitching in his sleep. A knock at the door pulled Maris from her thoughts. She opened it to a tall woman in a charcoal coat. "I'm Detective Valerie Monroe," the woman said, offering a gentle smile. Early 40s. Short black curls, dark eyes that missed little. "May I come in?" Maris hesitated, then stepped aside. "Of course." Monroe took a seat across from the twins, studying them for a moment before speaking. "I wanted to thank you. Deputy Maddox is alive because of your actions yesterday." The twins exchanged a quick glance, unsure what to say. Monroe's voice softened. "Sometimes bravery looks like medals. Sometimes it looks like mittens pressed into a wound." Maris cleared her throat. "I'm glad he's going to be okay." The girls, well, they only did what they thought was right. "That's more than many adults would have done," Monroe said. "I just came from the hospital. He's out of surgery, stable, lost a lot of blood, but the doctors say he has a fighting chance." She paused, her tone growing softer. He asked about the girls. Rusty stirred, sat up, and let out a low, protective woof. Monroe smiled. "And this must be Rusty, the hero behind the heroes. He doesn't like strangers at first," June said quietly, placing her hand on Rusty's head. "But he knows who the good people are." Monroe's expression shifted. Something behind her eyes flickered. A memory, perhaps. Dogs always do. She stayed only a few minutes more, offering her contact card and a promise to check in. As she left, Maris walked her to the door. "Detective," she said hesitantly, "please no fundraisers, no online campaigns. I don't want charity." Monroe nodded slowly. "I understand, but sometimes help isn't charity. It's community." She left without pressing further, but her mind lingered on Maris. The way she stood, straight-backed, but tired, proud, but clearly weighed down. Valerie Monroe knew that posture well. Her own mother had worn it, raising her and her two brothers after their father died in a warehouse fire when she was 9. Pride had kept them afloat, but it had also made the road harder. Later that day, a local news van pulled up in front of the apartment building. The anchor woman, asperately blonde in a red pica coat named Holly Marks, introduced herself with polished professionalism. "We'd love to feature your daughters on the evening segment," she told Maris. "We think the town could use a little good news." Maris wasn't sure, but Will's eager nod and June's hopeful smile softened her resistance. "Fine," she agreed, "but keep it respectful. They're still kids." Holly kept her word. The segment aired at 6 p.m., a montage of footage from the rescue scene mixed with brief interviews. Willa explained how Rusty alerted them. June, blushing, showed the scarf she used to stop the bleeding. "We just wanted to help," she said shilly. "No one should have to be alone like that." The clip was shared hundreds of times online. Comments poured in. "Such brave girls. The kind of story we need right now. Where do we donate?" Maris turned off the notifications. She didn't want handouts and she didn't want pity. What she wanted was a job that paid enough and a home she didn't fear losing every month. That night, Monroe sat in her car in the precinct parking lot, staring at the case folder open on her lap. Photos of illegal logging equipment, a list of known felons suspected to be in the area, and Cole Maddox's preliminary report, all pointing to something bigger than a routine patrol gone wrong. Monroe had always been meticulous. At 42, she'd made detective by being calm, analytical, and deeply focused. But something about this case, about Cole's instincts, gnawed at her. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone in town, someone respected, might be involved. Back in the apartment, Maris tucked the girls into bed. They were buzzing from the excitement, but fatigue eventually pulled them under. Rusty climbed onto the foot of their shared bed, placing his chin between his paws. Maris returned to the kitchen, sat down, and opened her notebook again. She stared at the column labeled outstanding rent, gas bill, credit card minimum, school lunch fees. She chewed the inside of her cheek, then flipped the page to a list of bakery recipes. Maple scones, cinnamon apple rolls, oat-crusted bread, the things she once made with joy. Thieving hadn't worked right in months. A soft knock pulled her from her thoughts. She opened the door to find a small envelope on the doormat. Inside was a note in tidy handwriting from someone who knows what it's like to raise kids alone. No strings, just gratitude. VM tucked behind the note was a gift card to the local grocery store. Maris stood in the doorway for a long time, the cool air brushing against her bare arms. She didn't cry, but something inside her loosened just a bit, like achnot pulled gently apart. The hallway of Alderlin Elementary smelled faintly of pencil shavings, floor wax, and applesauce. Comforting and forgettable scents for most, but today it was different. Red, white, and navy paper stars lined the walls cut out by the fifth graders themselves. In the middle of the hallway, just below the bulletin board that read, "Local Heroes," hung a photo of Willa and June Fairweather. Both girls stood with awkward smiles, flanked by Principal Hayes and a cardboard cutout of a police cruiser. In the multi-purpose room, the student body had gathered. The gym had been hastily transformed with folding chairs and crepe paper. At the front stood Principal Naomi Hayes, a woman in her mid-50s with a crown of short silver curls and a voice that could hush a room full of sugar-high fourth graders. She was tall, thin, and always wore brooches shaped like animals, a different one every day. Today's was a bronze fox. Naomi had been principal for nearly 20 years, respected not only for her strict standards, but for the fairness she carried like armor. Once she'd taken in a student whose mother vanished during a snowstorm and raised her until child services arrived. That memory lingered like a bruise in her soul, guiding every decision she made with quiet conviction. She tapped the mic. Students today won her courage, not the kind that shouts or punches, but the kind that acts quietly when no one is watching. Willa and June shuffled up to the stage. Their matching forest green sweaters had been recently laundered, and Rusty, who had been given special permission to attend, sat obediently at their feet, wearing a handmade paper medal. The applause was thunderous. A second-grade girl clutched a small sign. "Thank you, Willa and June." After the assembly, Naomi crouched to Rusty's level, running her fingers gently over his fur. "You're a good boy," she murmured. "Better than most adults I know." Meanwhile, across town, in a stark hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and filtered sunlight, Deputy Cole Maddox stared at the ceiling. His wounds were healing, but something else festered beneath the surface. The doctors said he was lucky. 17 stitches, 2 blood transfusions, no lasting organ damage, but lucky didn't sit right with him. He felt hollow, like he was missing something critical, and didn't know how to name it. Detective Monroe entered quietly, carrying a manila envelope. She pulled a chair beside him. "You look better," she said, her tone flat. Cole turned his head slowly. His face had regained color, but there were dark circles under his eyes. "Looks deceive?" Monroe studied him. "Want to talk about it?" He hesitated. "Maybe, but not about me." "About my dad?" She nodded, sensing the shift. Cole's father had been a police officer too. George Maddox, missing for over 2 decades. The official report labeled it a voluntary disappearance. Cole had never believed it. "I was 8, he said. "He went out to check a noise near the old mill, never came back. Mom packed us up and left town 3 months later. I only came back last year." "You think the shooting is connected?" He nodded. "The way they moved, the way they knew where I'd be, it wasn't random." Monroe opened the envelope, pulling out photos of tire tracks, fragments of 2-way radios, and a rusted pistol found near the forest clearing. She laid them out. "You recognize any of this?" He pointed to the radio casing. "That's police issue. Late, 90s. My dad carried something like that." Monroe frowned. "You think someone's been hiding it out there for 20 years? "I think someone's been watching, waiting." Back in the fair apartment, Maris sat on the edge of her bed, phone pressed to her ear. She was speaking to the market manager, trying to rent her old stall back. "Please, I know I'm behind, but I can make up for it. This season could turn things around." The voice on the other end was polite, but firm. "Maris, you still owe back dues from last fall. I can't open a space until it's settled. I'm sorry." She ended the call and rubbed her temple. On the dresser sat a half-filled jar labeled Oven Fund. Willa had started it. She'd been slipping coins inside every week. Maris hadn't had the heart to stop her. That afternoon, Willig, June, and Rusty wandered back toward the forest. It wasn't part of the plan. They were supposed to be cleaning their room, but curiosity tugged at Willa like a persistent wind. "I just want to see," she said. "See what?" June asked, dragging her boots through the leaves. Willa shrugged, pulling out a notebook from her jacket. "There's a part of the trail Rusty barked at last week. He never does that unless something's weird." Rusty led them to a clearing near a disused logging path. Tall grass had overtaken much of the area, and a few rusted barrels lay half buried in mud. Suddenly, Rusty began barking, short, sharp, and insistent. The girls froze. Willis scribbled in her notebook. "Location: south of Miller's Hollow. Rusty reactive. Possible scent detection." They didn't go closer, but they stayed long enough to snap a picture with June's hand-me-down flip phone. When they got home, Willa tucked the note inside her shoebox of important things, a treasure trove of leaf rubbings, weird rocks, and now an entry into something bigger than playground games. Later that evening, Detective Monroe walked through the precinct parking lot and passed by Officer Daniel Carnes, a recently transferred patrolman from Montpelier. Carnes was in his mid-30s, stocky and good-natured, with a habit of cracking jokes at the worst moments. He gave her a wave. "Evening, Detective. Evening, Carnes. You look like someone with a favor to ask." "Actually, yeah. My sister's running the Thanksgiving drive. We're collecting baked goods. Think I could put in a request for those lemon squares you brought to last month's debrief?" Monroe arched a brow. "I don't bake." Carnes blinked. "Seriously? Then, who?" "Never mind," she muttered, walking away with a smile. She hadn't baked anything. She'd picked them up from Asmall table outside the Fairweather apartment where Willa had left a sign, $1, help us fix our oven. Night fell eerily over Alder Glen, as it often did in late October. The trees in Redleaf Forest had begun to shed their fire-called leaves in earnest, and a chill crept into homes through the smallest of cracks. Streetlights flickered to life, casting golden halos onto the sidewalks. The sky above was a dusky blue, the stars still veiled behind drifting clouds. In the fair-weather kitchen, the smell of burnt wire lingered. Maris crouched in front of the oven, frowning as she jiggled a disconnected coil. Her brow was furrowed, and a smudge of grease ran across her cheekbone. She wore an old sweatshirt with frayed cuffs and pajama pants dotted with flour. Her fingers were red from the cold, but her jaw was set with quiet resolve. Willis stood nearby, flipping through a tattered instruction manual with oil-stained fingertips. June sat on a stool, organizing their toolbox like a junior mechanic. Rusty lay across the threshold, watching with ears perked and his tail thumping against the floor each time someone moved. "Try it now," Willa called, holding a flashlight between her teeth. Maris adjusted a knob and pressed the ignition. Nothing. She exhaled slowly. June looked up. "Maybe we can ask Principal Hayes." She fixed the projector once with a paperclip and chewing gum. Maris chuckled under her breath. Tempting. The doorbell rang. Willow ran to answer it and returned with a medium-sized brown box. On top was a pink receipt labeled Online Order. Apple Cinnamon Crumble X2. Inside was a type note. Please deliver by Sunday. My grandmother misses your baking. W. Miller. Maris turned the note over. She didn't recognize the handwriting. Did someone find our flyer? June tilted her head. We didn't leave one for Crumble, just muffins. Maris didn't say anything. Instead, she walked over to the counter, tucked the note into her recipe book, and turned back to the oven. Let's fix this thing. Halfway across town, Detective Valerie Monroe parked her sedan beside the trailhead that led into the southern edge of Red Leaf. Her boots crunched on frostbitten grass as she stepped out. She wore a thick black coat zipped up to her chin and a navy beanie pulled over her curls. A single street lamp buzzed overhead, casting shadows over the map in her hand. She wasn't alone. Cole Maddox, dressed in layers and a dark flannel jacket, stood beside her with a flashlight in one hand and a thermos in the other. You sure about this? Monroe asked. Cole nodded. Willis said Rusty got jumpy near the old power trail by Miller's Hollow. That's where I want to start. They moved quietly through the underbrush. The forest was eerily still, save for the occasional creak of a distant branch. After 20 minutes of hiking, they reached a clearing overgrown with vines and moss. Near a cluster of rocks, Cole spotted something that made him stop mid-step. A handheld, radio half buried in soil. Its casing cracked and the speaker grill smeared with something dark. He pulled on gloves and lifted it gently. On the back, faded but still visible, were the initials. GM Monroe exhaled. Your father. He nodded once. Lips pressed together. I think so. She crouched beside him, inspecting the scene. There were shallow drag marks nearby and faint boot prints partially erased by time. We'll call in a forensic team tomorrow. Too dark now. But this, she tapped the radio. This isn't nothing. Back at the precinct the next morning, Monroe met with Sergeant Louis Corian, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with gray stubble and perpetually tired eyes. He was known for his quiet loyalty and methodical mind, having served 30 years in law enforcement. Corian had trained Cole's father, and when Monroe showed him the radio, his hands trembled as he took it. I remember this model, he murmured. They stopped issuing these back in 2003. George carried one like it until the day he disappeared. You think someone from the department was involved? Monroe asked. Corian didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked up with haunted eyes. I think secrets don't stay buried forever, even in small towns. At the same time, Maris and her daughters finally coaxed the oven back to life. The three of them cheered as the warm, light inside flickered on. Rusty barked once, as if joining the celebration. Maris wiped her eyes with her sleeve, not from grease this time, but something gentler. Later that afternoon, she began baking again. The scent of brown sugar and apples filled their apartment. Willa and June took turns stirring batter while Maris shaped crusts. They laughed when Rusty stole a corner of dough from the table. As the pies cooled, Willa sat down with her notebook. She opened to a new page titled The Red Leaf Mystery. Her handwriting was tidy, every clue numbered. Entry number 3 read, Radio found near Miller's Hollow. Rusty barked again today. Might be more buried there. Meanwhile, Cole sat on his hospital bed, flipping through the local newspaper. The front page showed a blurry photo of Willa and June with the headline, Bravery runs in small boots. He smiled faintly. In the margin of the page, someone had written, She saved you. Don't waste it. He didn't recognize the handwriting, but he folded the paper and placed it beside his bed. Later, Monroe knocked at his door. She had another file in her hands. I need your help, she said. This isn't a solo case anymore. Cole met her eyes, steady now. Let's do it. By dusk, the wind had started to howl. The air over Alder Glen had shifted. thicker, colder, expectant. Leaves whipped across sidewalks in a frenzy, and the sky, once a soft slate blue, had darkened to charcoal. Thunder rolled in the distance like a warning, whispered between mountains. The people of the town, used to short tempests, bolted windows, and pulled dogs indoors. But this was different. A storm was coming. Maris Fairweather stood by the living room window, her eyes trained on the trees that bent like dancers in prayer. She held her phone in one hand, her apron still dusted with flour from the morning's baking. The apartment smelled of clove and cinnamon, but her heart was tight. The twins weren't home. They said they were going to the edge of the forest, she murmured to herself, panic creeping in. She turned to Rusty's food bowl, full untouched. Oh, deep in the woods, Willa and June clung together beneath the gnarled roots of an upturned tree, their breath clouding in the cold. Rusty crouched beside them, his ears flat and his flanks heaving. The storm had come faster than they thought. Rain falling sideways, wind shrieking through the canopy, and worst of all, voices. The girls had wandered deeper into Redleaf that afternoon, hoping to trace more of the trail Rusty had reacted to. Willa carried her notebook. June brought the flashlight, but then they heard men speaking in low tones, unfamiliar, sharp, and saw a flicker of light, not from flashlights, but headlamps. Rusty had growled deep and urgent. Before they could run, they heard one of the men say, "Those girls saw something." They fooled. Rusty had led them to the hiding spot. They now huddled in, an old hollow where roots formed a partial roof, the earth around them damp and smelling of decay. But it was safe for now. In the sheriff's office, Detective Monroe stood by the storm tracking map, her coat halfing. The call had come in from Maris minutes earlier. Missing girls. Possible danger. Location: forest edge near the Miller's hollow path. A sick knot twisted in her stomach. Cole entered, limping slightly, his body still not fully recovered. He wore a black waterproof jacket and a determined look. "I'm going," he said. Monroe didn't argue. She handed him the radio. "We go together." They drove the department's 4x4 into the squall. Windshield wipers beating like frantic hearts. Roads were flooded. Tree limbs cracked above them. But they pushed through. Every minute mattered. In the woods, Willis shivered. The cold had crept into her bones, and her teeth chattered against each other. She looked at June, curled up next to her, cheeks red and wet. Rusty stood again and growled, his body tense. Then snap. A branch broke, closer than before. Willa leaned into her sister's ear. "If something happens, you run. I'm not leaving you." Rusty's hackles rose. He took 2 steps forward into the rain, positioning himself between the noise and the girls. From the trees, 2 shadows emerged, men in heavy coats, their eyes scanning the underbrush. "I saw them head this way," one muttered. Suddenly, Rusty barked explosive and sharp. He launched into the clearing, his body all muscle and fury. One of the men cursed, raising his flashlight just in time to catch Rusty mid-leap. The dog knocked him backward into the mud. The other man swung wildly with a metal rod, catching Rusty on the side. The dog yelped, but didn't retreat. Instead, he charged again, pulling them both deeper into the woods away from the girls. The twins sat frozen. They didn't dare move. Cole and Monroe arrived minutes later, headlights flickered through the trees. Cole jumped from the vehicle before it stopped completely. Flashlight and weapon drawn. "Girls!" he shouted over the wind. "Willa! June!" From the hollow, a small voice. "Here!" Monroe rushed to them, dropping to her knees and pulling June into her arms. Cole reached for Willa, his hands trembling. "You're safe now. We've got you." Then they heard a whimper. Rusty stumbled from the tree-line, blood on his flank, limping heavily. His eyes found the girls and his tail thumped once before he collapsed. "Rusty!" both girls cried. Rushing to him, Cole lifted the dog gently, cradling his body against his chest. "He's hurt bad," he said. They piled into the vehicle, Monroe radioing for a vet. The drive back was slow, the rain a curtain of needles, but inside the car there was a fragile silence, part awe, part relief. At the animal hospital, they were met by Dr. Martha Liu, a petite woman in her early 40s with dark hair pulled into a low bun and precise movements that spoke of experience. She had a calm, direct demeanor and a pair of reading glasses perpetually perched at the edge of her nose. "He's lost a lot of blood," she said after examining Rusty. "But he's strong. If he makes it through tonight, he'll be okay." The girls didn't leave his side. Back home, dried and wrapped in blankets, Willa finally spoke as June leaned on her shoulder. I thought maybe Mom would give up on us. That, she'd get too tired of trying." June looked at her wide-eyed. She never would. She almost had to sell her rings, Willa whispered. June took her hand. "We don't need rings. We just need her and Rusty, that's all." Cole sat nearby, overhearing every word. His eyes shimmered, and for the first time in years, tears slipped down his cheeks. Not for pain, but for the family he never got to keep, and for the one he was watching mend in front of him. A month passed, and with it, the sharpness of late autumn softened. The trees of red-leaf forest stood bare now, their limbs stretched skyward like silent witnesses. Frost still kissed the grass in the mornings, but the sun finally had returned. It warmed the sidewalks of Alder Glen and turned the bakery window panes golden. For the first time in months, there was no storm on the horizon. The newly painted sign above the market square read, "Scrums and Crusts." The modest wooden booth, once empty and dust-covered, no-welled trays of warm pastries and jars of homemade preserves. The air was filled with the scent of maple-glazed scones and spiced apple tarts. Maris Farweather stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, a fresh apron tied around her waist. Her hair was pinned up, her cheeks rosy from the oven's heat, not stress. There was still a quiet worry in her gaze, but it had softened into something lighter, something that resembled hope. A crowd bustled about the reopening. A chalkboard on the side read, "Ask about our hero muffins," named after 2 brave girls and 1 very good dog. Behind the booth, Willa and June handed out napkins and change, both wearing matching red beanies and grins too big for their small faces. Rusty lay beneath Thedible, a soft bandage still around his flank, his tail wagging lazily, each time someone offered him a scratch. Across town at Alder Glen's Municipal Center, the community gymnasium had been transformed. Balloons in navy and white were tied to folding chairs. A large banner read, "Junior Lifesaver Program Launch in honor of Willa and June Fairweather." Rows of local children sat cross-legged on the floor, their eyes wide with curiosity, as a tall man in crisp navy shirt stepped forward. Deputy Cole Maddox had made a full recovery. The color had returned to his face, and though he walked with a slight limp, there was something steadier in his step, like a man who had re-entered his life with both feet. At 32, his light brown hair was growing back where it had been shaved for surgery, and his uniform sat neatly on his frame, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He cleared his throat and spoke into the microphone. "Sometimes heroes don't carry badges or wear capes," he began. "Sometimes they're 10 years old with scraped knees and more courage than most of us put together." The crowd laughed gently. June hid behind her sister's shoulder. Will beamed. Cole continued, "Thanks to these girls, this town has not only one more life, but a new program where kids will learn first aid, emergency response, and the value of staying calm in chaos." Applause rang out. At the end of the ceremony, Monroe stepped onto the stage with a velvet box in hand. She wore her formal dress coat, hair neatly tied, her voice even but reverent. And finally, we would like to recognize a member of this town who, though he walks on 4 legs, has the heart of a lion. Rusty, freshly groomed, walked toward the platform on his own. A bright blue ribbon hung around his neck. Monroe knelt and clipped a small round medal onto it, K-9 Civilian Honor Award. The crowd stood. Willow whispered to her sister, "He looks like he's smiling." That evening, the Fairweathers returned home as a family of 5. 3 humans, 1 heroic German shepherd, and a new sourdough starter named Gutsy. Cole came with them, his arms full of leftover muffins and his heart full of something he hadn't named yet. He had officially transferred to the town's community outreach unit, focusing on safety education and youth engagement. But more than that, he had started having Sunday dinner with the Fairweathers. The girls had already set a place for him on the chart that listed family jobs. His square read dishwasher and storyteller, and as the sun dipped low, painting the kitchen windows in honey tones, Monroe stopped by. She handed Cole a small cassette tape in a plastic case worn at the corners. Her voice was quieter than usual. It was found in the old department archive, misfiled in an old evidence box. Cole looked at her confused. She nodded. "It's your dad." They played it that night on an old cassette player dug up from Maris's closet. The tape crackled at first, then cleared. George Maddox's voice came through. Rough, low, thoughtful. "If you're hearing this, I guess I didn't make it out. That's not what I wanted. But if one day you find yourself facing a choice between doing what's safe and doing what's right, please, son, choose right, even if it costs you. Because this badge means nothing if you're too afraid to use it when it matters." No one spoke for a long time after it ended. Cole finally set the tape down. He wasn't perfect, but he knew who he wanted to be. Willa sat on the front steps later. That night, her knees hugged to her chest. June sat beside her, chin tilted up at the stars. Rusty lay between them, still recovering, his breath steady and warm. "Do you think we really saved someone?" Will asked. June nodded, eyes still skyward. "I think we saved more than one." Rusty wagged his tail once, as if agreeing. Willa smiled, her voice soft. "Funny thing is, I think we got saved too. Sometimes miracles don't come as lightning bolts or grand rescues. Sometimes they arrive in the shape of 2 small hands, a wounded dog, and the quiet decision to do what's right, no matter how hard. This story reminds us that courage doesn't require age, and love doesn't need riches to be powerful. It reminds us that in our darkest storms, God often works through the least expected. Through children, through strangers, through those who simply choose compassion. Maybe you too have someone to protect. Maybe your act of kindness today is the miracle someone else has been praying for. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to believe in goodness again. Comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to join us in sharing more stories that uplift, heal, and inspire. May God bless you and those you love. Stay safe, stay kind, and never stop choosing what's